Scottish record holder in the 100 fly short course, 57.1, former Scottish record holder long course of 58.9, Scottish record very recently in the 4x100 freestyle a few weeks ago in Birmingham, and multiple Scottish and British university champion over a very long and successful career. So fresh off the back of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham very recently, 6 races, multiple finals and that fantastic national record. How do you feel now that dust has settled?
Yeah, I think I'm just getting back into the swing of things again, obviously coming out of the whole Games experience. We had a great prep camp up in Aberdeen with Scottish swimming, and then into village life, not having to cook, clean, really do anything except concentrate on my performances, which was obviously great, but it's nice to come back into reality. So yeah, just enjoying spending time with family and friends again.
Yeah, I mean it takes a few weeks to kind of decompress and just readjust yourself to things, so it's nice to take that time over the summer to do that. So really thinking about, a few of your top highlights there, can you give me a bit of a rundown of your swimming history as a whole, thinking back to when you were a junior and a few key points along the journey?
Yeah, so I've been swimming since I was 7 years old, so quite an early start. I first started out at Incas, which was just my local club in Inverkeithing. Stayed there for a few years. I was part of the integrated Fife performance team for a few years before moving on to Carnegie, which I would say was my real sort of age group base. I think I joined there in 2012, so just off the back of the Olympics in London, and that was really where my swimming started to take off. I swam there for 3 or 4 years before moving to the University of Edinburgh in 2015. I actually moved there when I was still in high school, so I spent my 6th year of high school travelling between Fife and Edinburgh, but that really set me up well for the transition into university, and I've swam at the University of Edinburgh ever since.
Nice. And I guess thinking around your experiences of Scottish swimming's pathway, so obviously it's taken on different terms and it's been called different things, but the core principles of the pathway are still very much what they are today. What memories and experiences do you have of making your way through that system?
Yeah, so as I said, started swimming very young, was part of the pathway from a very young age as well. I think it's 9 years old you can start. So back then it was the district regional programme, DRP, which I was a part of, based in Fife. So I went there for a couple of years, progressed up into YDS, then into youth squad. So I've really been a part of the pathway my whole career pretty much, and I think that really helped me grow not only as an athlete but as a person. Obviously coming from a very small club originally, I didn't know that many people, so these programs really helped me to make a lot of friends that I'm still very close with today. It really helps set you up.
And do you have any negative experiences or sort of learning experiences going through the pathway?
A memory that I do remember quite starkly would be when I was first in the DRP, and I went with one other girl from my club, and she was quite overwhelmed by the situation. She wasn't really enjoying it, and she ended up being picked up and taken home, so I felt like I was almost left on my own. I didn't really know anyone, but I think those situations, they kind of force you into just getting to know new people, and after that you're absolutely fine. And I think it's just about seizing those opportunities, and even when others around you might falter, to keep going, because that's the right pathway for you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we'll circle back to that from an advice point of view as well, because I think that's a great way to approach uncertainty and the unknown in general. So I think for anyone on the edge of going into these systems, or it might be their first time in what is youth or senior academy or junior academy, any of that sort of thing, it's really embrace the uncertainty and just might be a bit uncomfortable, but just lean into it and see where it goes. So now we've talked a little bit around the pathway as a whole. Can you give me a single career high?
I think for me it would be breaking the Scottish record for the first time. I think it was maybe back in 2017. I think it was a goal that I'd been chasing for quite a while, and I knew I was capable of doing it. So when I finally did it, it was just sort of everything coming together. And then subsequently, the first time I broke 59 and went 58 seconds. Something I'll touch on later, but that was definitely a defining moment in my career for sure.
And do you think about sort of experiences or training camps as a whole? Is there anything that sticks out in your mind?
I think an obvious one would be the Commonwealth Games, very fresh, and it was such a great experience, particularly swimming in the relays. I think the whole atmosphere and being part of that team, I think for me personally, I didn't swim as well as I would have liked in my individuals, but the relays were sort of my space to shine, and I think that whole experience is something I'll remember for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the maybe not doing as well as you thought individually takes us on quite well into the next section, which is moments of challenge, learning experiences. We'll circle back to the competitive element from swimming, but I really want to touch on what is a really important subject and area for everyone at school. You know, how do you balance school and swimming, that dual career pursuit?
Yeah, I think I've always been quite an academic person, a straight A student through high school, and I achieved a first class honours in my degree at university. So I've always been very academically driven, which is something that perhaps conflicts with being a sports person. But I think it just shows that you can do both, and it's just about finding that balance. And I think, to be honest, finding the balance in high school was arguably more challenging than it was at university. Being at school 9 till 3 every day, with training on top of that, whereas university is a bit more flexible. You might have a lecture for an hour or two during the day, but you have a lot more time to sort of do your own independent study. But I think at high school I did manage it quite well. I was fortunate that my school was very accommodating of sport. They allowed me to drop out of core PE, obviously doing a lot of exercise and training out with. So they gave me extra study periods during the week. So I had 2 extra study periods that I could just go and sit in an empty classroom and catch up on, whether that be homework, assignments, things like that. And I think that definitely helped during my exam years at school.
And thinking around, you said there that learning how to cope or how to kind of get that balance in high school was really important for further on in university life. What is it that you did then? How did you learn to adapt to 9 to 3 and then training? How did you kind of manage that workload from both the academics and the sport?
I think it's just about prioritising your workload. So there's certain things that need to be done there and then, not being distracted. I think by your phone is a very common issue these days, like putting your phone away. If you know you've only got an hour to get your work done, you spend that entire hour doing your work, where compared to someone who might have 3 hours but spends half an hour watching YouTube videos throughout that. I think it's about just being quite strict and diligent with yourself, managing your time well, and it is achievable. You just have to attack it and know that it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, so going in with that mindset of who likes studying, I mean, it's a thing, it's a means to an end, you need to do it. So just around that, do you have maybe one top tip for someone who's just approaching their national fives or higher, or maybe even making that transition into uni, just to focus on one area to kind of get them through the studying?
I think it is about being quite strict with yourself, and knowing that you probably will have less time than some of your peers, but that doesn't mean that you can't have good quality study time. So just about prioritising that. Sometimes you might have to forgo opportunities to go and see friends, but I think if you want to achieve both in the pool and academically, that's just a sacrifice that you have to make at the time. And often it'll be intense periods of studying, but there's always lulls where you will have more free time, and it's just pushing through those tough times.
Yeah, I mean, I think pushing through, coping, sacrifice, these are all key themes that unfortunately do come hand in hand with sport, and it takes us on to the next sort of core area. We're talking around those moments of challenge and learning experience. What's the most challenging moment of your swimming career?
I think for me it would definitely be missing out on the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games back in 2018. That was always a goal of mine, and unfortunately it didn't quite come together. So I was nominated as part of the women's 4x1 medley relay. At the time I was the fastest female 100 fly Scottish record holder at the time, but unfortunately we didn't quite achieve the qualification time that Scottish Swimming and Team Scotland had set out for us. So we were put into the nomination pool to be put forward back in, I think it was around October 2017 sort of time when the team was originally picked, with the games being in the April of 2018, so still a few months out. And then we were just sort of waiting. And in February of 2018, I got a phone call from Ali to say that unfortunately we weren't going to be taken to the games. So that was really quite a tough phone call to receive, and that's probably one of the biggest lows of my sporting career, just dealing with that both emotionally and physically. I found it really challenging to train that week. I probably trained maybe 2 or 3 times instead of 8 or 9. And then we were actually going down to the Bucks long course, the British University Championships that weekend, and I'd done very little training that week. My head just wasn't in it, but as a student athlete I was obligated to compete. The university obviously provided me with such great support throughout my time, and obviously I wanted to go and do my best for them. So I spoke with my coach and he said, you just need to go in and do your best, like that's all we can ask of you right now. But I actually ended up going in, breaking the Scottish record again. That was the first time that I went 58, so big drop from 59.5 down to 58.9. And to be honest, I couldn't even tell you now how that happened, because like I said, I had hardly trained that week. Mentally I was not in the right headspace, but I think sometimes when you are relaxed, I was obviously not putting any pressure on myself. The swim just sort of took care of itself, and I think doing that proved not only to myself but to other people that I was worthy of being on that team. Whether they took me or not is in the past and I'm not going to dwell on it, but I think in that moment I proved to myself that I was capable of doing that time, and it was their loss that they didn't have me on the team.
Yeah, I mean, so much to unpack there. I mean, that's a great way, or a great example of how to reframe what was an immense disappointment into a huge positive career high from such a low. But backtracking a little bit, that period when you were told you could be selected in October 2017, how did you cope with the uncertainty all the way through to the point where you were told it's not going to happen?
I think I like to see myself as quite a positive person, so I think all the way through that process I was hopeful that we were going to be taken. I felt like we were in quite a strong position in comparison to some of the other nominations, and it looked like it was going that way. The majority of my squad at the University of Edinburgh, they were all training for that. They'd already been selected, so we're all sort of going through it together. Training camps abroad, everything was all sort of aligning towards going, and I don't know if that made it almost worse that I'd been involved in it up until that point, and then it was just sort of cut, which was quite challenging. And with the games being in Australia, the team went away quite a while in advance for holding camp and things, and then I was obviously left behind. That was quite challenging, but at the same time I think without those guys I wouldn't have been able to get through that period, because they were really there to keep me motivated throughout, and I think seeing their success out there sort of kept me upbeat.
So you highlighted the fact that, you know, the positive frame of mind got you through, looking to your peers got you through. Was there a sort of central learning experience that you could apply to, you know, negative situations or hardship?
I think it's just about being resilient and being confident in yourself. Like I knew that I was capable of producing that swim, and I fully understand that I didn't produce that swim during the qualification period, and then therefore that is why I didn't get to go to the games. But I think knowing that I had that performance in me, that sort of kept me going and spurred me on over the next 4 years to be more determined to make the team this year.
You know, paid off in dividends in the fact that you came back and you had that full games experience, and it goes to show that what could have been a very difficult career-ending moment potentially, or at least a very disheartening one, the fact that you turned that around and, you know, a few weeks later produced one of the fastest swims you'd ever gone, or the fastest swim.
Yeah.
I think it's testament to younger athletes push through the hardship and learn from the difficult situations, because they can be more powerful than your greatest successes in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you definitely learn more from your disappointments than your successes, because obviously when you swim well, you're really happy, but you don't necessarily learn, you don't necessarily go back and look at those races and be like, oh, what could I do better in that? Compared to a disappointing race, you probably are going to go back and reflect on that.
Oh, nice. So, thinking now around competitions, obviously that's been a recurring theme, the competitive element that is our sport. But how do you prepare for competitions? So it can be a local meet or on the biggest stage, such as the Commonwealth Games.
I think obviously you can split it up into different sections. So there's the physical component. Obviously in the lead up to competition, you want to be resting more. When I was younger, I always got told to bank sleep. So in the week leading up, make sure you're getting enough sleep, not staying up too late, just sort of getting into good sleeping habits, things like that. There's the nutritional side of things, so making sure you're eating the right things. Again, predominantly in the lead up, is arguably more important than during the meet itself. And again, if you're away competing, away from home, you might not have access to the same foods that you would typically, so your eating might be a bit different to normal. But I think as I've gotten older, it's definitely been more of the mental side of things in terms of my preparation. So over the last few years, I've been working with sports psychologist Matilda at the university, and I think that's really helped me to prepare much better for my races. For the trials for the Commonwealth Games this year, we sat down and we made a list of lots of different situations that could arise at the trials, and then sort of worked through them and how I would feel, what would my initial reaction be to that situation, how would I feel about it, was this type of thinking helpful to producing a good performance, and if not, how can we reframe that situation so that even if it's not necessarily a positive situation, it might be a negative situation, but how can you reframe that situation in order to move forward? And I think that really helped me both at the trials and then subsequently at the games, because when those situations did arise, I was prepared for it, I thought about it, and I was therefore able to get rid of the negative thinking and reframe that into a way that was more positive, so I could continue on with the meet.
There's some really interesting stuff there. I think the banking sleep's a big one. I think sleep, particularly when you're younger, you're not fully aware of how important it is, so that's an excellent point. Then nutrition, of course, learning, and it's quite interesting what you said about what you do before is almost more important than what you do when you're there. It's almost just eating what you're comfortable with and knowing what works for you, and that probably leans quite well into that situation planning that you talked about mentally. I think that mental prep, planning the what if type scenarios, and all of that leads into quite a neat pre-performance routine that would be your build up to a competition. What do you do on the day, sort of 3-4 hours away from a peak performance? Obviously you're banking sleep, your nutrition, all that mental prep could be years or months in the making. But what do you do to get into that correct place physically and mentally a few hours away from the race?
I think you just have to have confidence in yourself that you have done all that prep, and by race day there's actually not much more you can do at that point. Like even for example in the prep camp before the Commonwealth Games, and Steve said to us, it doesn't matter what you do in training now, you've done all the hard work and now we're just refining, we're resting up and we're going to be ready to go come that race day. So I think it's just being relaxed, knowing that you've put in all the work, whether that be your training, your nutrition, your sleep, your mental skills, like I spoke about, so that when it comes to race day, you're almost just going through a process and following your plan. So for me, I like to always have porridge on a race day. I'll always have a porridge pot or a bowl of porridge, something like that, before my race, coffee. I'll tend to have a hydration tablet in a bottle of water just to make sure that I'm fully hydrated going into the day. Head to the pool. I usually like to warm up within an hour of my race. I don't like to be warmed up too early in advance, make sure I've done some good priming, which is something that I've had to refine throughout my career, but I think by the end I definitely did have something that worked for me. So I would just tend to do 450s front crawl on 60 seconds, descend 1 to 4. So just building up, increasing my heart rate, increasing the tempo, and whether that was for freestyle race or fly race, it didn't really matter. It was just about getting my body up and ready to go. So I'd make sure I do my priming at the end of my warm up, come out, and I would tend to have a banana, maybe an energy gel, straight after my warm up, then chill out, put some clothes back on again. And then for me, I tended to put my suit on quite late, not too far in advance of the race. And then a bit of land priming. So for me, I tended to do some med ball slams and then some shoulder work with a TheraBand, just a couple of rounds of each, making sure that I'm nice and warmed up and ready to go, and then just head round to the call room, chill out. I was always quite a chilled person in the call room, I'd say. I never really listened to music. I'd rather just sit, maybe chat to someone beside me, or not, just sort of see what the vibe was of the call room, but never take it too seriously, because I think if I did that, I would just get in my own head a bit.
That's a very neat pre-performance routine you've got there, and that's clearly been, I'm assuming, months and years in the making. Obviously towards the end of your career, or where you are right now off the back of the Commonwealth Games, that's down to a T. You probably know it very well, you know what works. How much does your routinized behaviour implicate your grounding or keep you in the moment? You're saying you go into the call room quite relaxed. Obviously you've got this routine. Do you think that helps keep you in the right place mentally and keeps you in that mode to right time to perform?
Yeah, I think definitely, because it means you've always got the next step to think about, so you're never really thinking too far in advance. There's always something else to do, and I think for me that definitely helps me not get too in my own head and overthink something that I don't need to overthink, because definitely my best races have come when I've been relaxed, which is obviously a lot easier said than done, and I think for me perhaps that's why my freestyle maybe came on so well towards the end of my career, because it was almost a secondary focus. The fly was obviously always the main focus, and I would perhaps get myself a bit more nervous and worked up about that, whereas the freestyle was always seen as more of a secondary event. It was a bit of fun, and I think I really saw good success from that mindset and outlook.
And do you think the work that you've done with the psychologist helped sort of encourage or coax that relaxed frame of mind over the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. The work I did with Matilda was great, and I think more athletes should utilise services like that, because I think it's perhaps when we frown upon the term like psychologist, you often might think, oh, like if I go see a psychologist, like there's something wrong with me, but there's actually a lot we can learn. Like you practice your skills and drills in the pool, so why not practice your mental skills as well? Because I think ultimately they always say, like, walking out to the Olympic final, you've got 8 guys, 8 girls who are very good swimmers, and it's about who can keep their head and swim that race on the day.
So we'll move on from there. So thinking about nutrition and recovery, also at competitions, obviously you've talked a lot around that pre-performance routine, what you're doing, nutrition and prep, and the build-up to, as well as that mental side and the build-up on the day. What if you have, say, at the Commonwealth Games, you had 6 races across multiple days, some of which are racing well into the evenings, then again early morning. How are you recovering and getting that turnaround for that multi-event competition?
Yeah, I think the Commonwealth Games was obviously not only the biggest competition I've ever done, but also just in terms of scale. The heats were later in the morning than we'd traditionally be used to, not starting until 10:30, but then the finals also weren't starting until 7 p.m. And I was being part of the relays, which were often not swimming till 9 p.m, 9:30. You really do need to sort of just shift your body clock round, especially with taking caffeine in those swims, to sort of get the best out of myself, make sure that I'm firing. it did lead to some very late nights, and then obviously you have to be up the next morning for your heats again. Luckily for me, I only had one evening into morning heats, but it was quite challenging. I think it's just being in the right headspace that, you know, yes, I've had caffeine, yes, I'm going to be lying here awake, I know I should be sleeping, but I'm not. I'm just not getting too worked up about that. And I guess it goes back to that whole banking sleep. I knew I'd been sleeping very well in the weeks leading up, definitely getting a lot more sleep than I usually would at home, just with the training being a bit later as well. And again, not having any other responsibilities other than to be there to swim. So I think it just goes back to that whole principle of banking sleep and just sort of trusting what you've done will carry you through. Even nutrition wise, obviously with the later swims, you're having to change your eating time. Sometimes it'd be 11:30 p.m. before I'd be having my dinner, which is obviously a bit crazy. But again, you've just got to shift things around. So it meant I'd do my heats, I'd come back, maybe have a nap, and then not go to lunch until say 3 o'clock, because I know that everything is going to be pushed back. Make sure I take some food out of the dining hall to have before I go back for the finals. Just things like that. I think it's all just about planning and thinking in advance so that you know what's coming next.
And thinking around the theme of training and practicing, so you've got your practicing your mental side, practicing the actual training methods and your race. Do you think that previous competitions that you've been involved in, where maybe they're a bit more condensed, concentrated, that has led to a practice for the bigger meets of those back-to-back racing days, have been a bit of a learning experience of how to cope with the late nights into the early mornings, the having to nap and adapt your nutrition, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I think as a junior swimmer, for sure, I was always doing a very big programme. Flies obviously been my main one for many years, but I did also do freestyle when I was a bit younger, IM as well, so I was quite used to having a busier programme. And then even into my senior years, still doing a bit of free, a bit of fly. I'd often be used to doing multiple swims in the session, things like that, and I think that definitely helped me prepare for this event. I did the youth commies back in 2015 as well, which is, although on a smaller scale, a similar sort of experience, sort of that village life, the multi-sport event as well. But I think the whole scope of the Commonwealth Games was just, yeah, it was amazing.
And thinking again there, you've talked around some of your junior sides, the senior. How was your transition from junior to senior? Obviously everything you've done has led up to the point a few weeks ago, but there's been lots of key points throughout there, sort of moments of learning, experience. Maybe one of the most challenging for some people can be that transition from the junior ranks into the senior.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the transition that I made into Carnegie as a age grouper really was sort of the starting point of my career, and I enjoyed quite a successful junior career at snags, at British age groups, all these competitions. I did do quite well, so I think making that transition onto the senior stage was quite challenging. For example, my best event used to be the 200 fly. I swam 2:12 200 fly long course when I was 15 and didn't PB again for 4 years, which was obviously really challenging. And even my 100 butterfly, like my PB is still that swim in 2018. So it is challenging. You're not always going to be getting those best times, but you've just got to stick at it. Like I had a look at my rankings on the database or whatever it is. I think I've been 59 like 50 times or something. So I've never been far off, but I've never got that 58 again. I've done it twice in my career and I've never quite got back to it. And I think you're always chasing that, but it's not always there.
I mean, the brutal nature of our sport is we're so time-based. We're constantly chasing times, chasing outcomes. And especially as a junior, like you've said, you were so successful and it's just a straight up trajectory, and it's just clearly not the most common across, and for most people, 99% of athletes, it's not going to be like that. And I think we've touched a few times here about the lows, the experiences of, you know, hardship, not doing best times, long periods of not doing best times, but it's the consistency of what you're doing and the process along the journey to lead to what is the end outcome of the Commonwealth Games or a big competition and performing at your absolute best and coming away with a national record. So
yeah, totally.
Testament from that junior to senior transition. It's not always easy, but it can be very much worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, even a year ago, if you'd said I was going to qualify for the Commonwealth Games on freestyle, I don't think I would have believed you. So I think I'm really glad that I did make that choice to put more of a focus on my freestyle, because to be part of that girls' relay team was really rewarding and something I'm really proud of.
And now, sort of quite neatly drawing into the final few questions, it's, you know, a reflective experience, these sort of interviews, or thinking back about your career from when you first started to where you are now. What advice would you give to a younger self with everything you now know, everything you've gone through? What would you say to that 7 or 8-year-old you?
I don't think there's anything major that I would change about my career. I think it would be just changing minor things, so it might be being better at getting into good sleeping habits earlier or being on top of my nutrition earlier. I don't think there's anything that I did particularly badly. I think I did do pretty much everything I could, especially balancing between sport and academics. So I don't think there's anything major I would change. I think it would just be being on top of the little things to get those little 1% gains earlier.
Great, well, it's been a pleasure. I think it's been a very insightful conversation, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of young athletes that gain insight and find this a very rewarding process, so thank you.
Thank you.